Never have I ever embarrassed myself on the internet.
If only I could turn back time.
Hey there guys, my name's Megan if you're new here, and if not, welcome back for another spooky episode of Left for Reddit, where we'll get drunk and discuss some of the darkest tales from the underbelly of the internet. Reddit. If you like all things true crime, supernatural, UFO, conspiracy theory, and all that good stuff in between, then please hit that subscribe button. I'll be here for you each week with our true crime killer weekends, and on and off every couple of Wednesdays with our weirdo Wednesdays and Left for Reddit, where I'll discuss something spooky I've heard. Do any of you have your own horrifying tales or true crime near misses? If so, please send those over to megankillerweekend@gmail.com. That's megankillerweekend@gmail.com. Right gang, we all ready to be terrified out of our knickers? No, me neither. That's what the alcohol is for. So my wee gremlins, I love me some pizza. And no, I'm not having a stroke and just telling you random information about myself. I'm telling you this because our first story is called You Ordered a Pizza, Not a Date with Me. The story, by username Running in Circles 234, starts off. When I was 20 years old, so 6 years ago, I worked as a delivery girl for a pretty popular pizzeria in my area. I could not do this job because I would just end up being rolled out of the establishment every night. Initially, I worked the late morning to mid-afternoon shift, but when the guy who delivered for the night shift ended up getting fired due to him losing his license because of a DUI.
Been drinking tonight?
Nah.
I can smell it on you.
I was placed on the night shift since my boss hired a family friend who could only work my shift for whatever reason. I really didn't want this shift because you never know if people who order late at night actually want a pizza or if they have other intentions in mind. Would you like a side of homicide with your pepperoni, sir? Unfortunately, my boss was an asshole and essentially told me if I wasn't willing to work the night shift, I was fired. I wasn't exactly in a position where I could be out of work, albeit temporarily, so I reluctantly worked that shift. The first month of this shift went by without any issues until I had to deliver a pizza to a house that just barely made our delivery radius. I punched it into my GPS and the house was located in a pretty suburban part of the city. I arrive and it's about 11 p.m. The block was extremely quiet, decently lit and mostly littered with modern townhouses. But the house I delivered to was a duplex. I ring the doorbell and wait for about 30 seconds. No answer. I ring it again and wait another 30 seconds. Still no answer. I'm standing there getting pretty nervous that something's about to go down, like your death. But thankfully, a man opens the door. He looked like he was in his late 40s. He was pretty tall, maybe a little over 6 foot, and he was very skinny, like Slender Man. I tell him that this is his pizza, and he just stands there, staring at me. I mean, why do they always just stare? Do you need an optometrist? Are you struggling? What's happening? I asked him if he was okay, and he responded by saying, "Yeah, I'm fine, sorry. I got off work not too long ago, and I'm zoning out a bit." Fair enough, I suppose. He hands me the money, and I hand him the pizza, and as I'm making change, he says, "You're really beautiful. You know that?" Not really thinking too much into it, I thanked him for the compliment and gave him his change. I said good night and he did too. I walked back to my car and finished my deliveries for the night. A few days later, I get a delivery order
to the same house.
I head over there around the same time as last time and ring the doorbell. He answers the door very excitedly and said, "Hey, it's you again. How are you?" I told him I was tired and I can't wait to go home, to which he chuckled and said, "I know that feeling pretty well." As he was pulling out his wallet, he counted his money and asked me what my name is. Being kinda tired at this point and not really thinking straight, I stupidly tell him my name. As I'm making change, he asks if he could have my number, as he'd love to hang out with someone as gorgeous as I am. I've literally only met this guy like twice to deliver a pizza. I had no idea who this guy was, and I'm positive he barely knew who I was as well. Another thing to mention is that I looked way younger than what I was at the time. I was told by numerous people that I still looked like I was 15, and I was hoping he thought differently and wasn't hitting on what he thought to be a teenager. Questionable. I'm just standing there awkwardly for a few seconds before I muster out, "Sorry, I have a boyfriend." He gets upset and says, "Oh, okay, I see." We stand there in silence before I tell him to have a good night and walk back to my car. He says nothing and still stands in the doorway staring at me until he finally went back inside and I started my car. I got a pretty creepy vibe from this guy. So self-aware. And I even brought it up to my co-workers and they agreed it was pretty creepy. Except for my boss, who overheard everything and claimed I was making up stories and trying to gain sympathy for having to take the night shift. Fucking asshole. A week later, as I am working the night shift, and we get an order from the same guy again. And this is when shit finally hits the fan. I arrive at the house at around 10:30 p.m. and keep in mind that from my perspective on the road, it didn't look like a single light in that house was on. I get out of my car and I walk to the front door with a pizza box in my arms. As I'm approaching the door, it quickly swings open to reveal the man, except this time he was wearing a suit. He laughs and said, "Sorry if I scared you. I saw you out the window and figured I'd just open the door now so that you wouldn't have to ring the bell." I was getting scared because, as I mentioned before, there were no lights on in this house. So was he just sitting in the dark in his suit this whole time? And if so, why? I nervously laughed and said, "It's okay." He asked me if I liked his suit, to which I said yes. Why? Why would you say yes? No, I don't. It's gross and creepy and you're in a dark house alone. He then asks me, "Would you like to go on a date with me tonight?" What the fuck? I once again tell him I have a boyfriend, to which he chuckles, gets really close to me and says, "Honey, there's no way a girl your age is in a serious relationship. If you go on a date with me, I'll show you how a real man treats a girl." Oh my god. He grabs the pizza box from me and throws it to the side and grabs me by my arms. I'm officially shitting bricks at this point and try not to cry from the fear that was overwhelming me. I start pleading with him, "Dude, please, I just want to go home. I don't want to go on a date tonight." He just stares at me with the most sinister look I've seen on someone's face and says, "I don't care. Get inside now. We're gonna have a good time." He starts trying to pull me into the house and I'm trying to resist as hard as I can. After a bit of struggling, he lets go of one of my arms and starts grabbing something out of his pocket, which I presumed was a knife. I did something that to this day I'm still thankful worked as he was doing that. I used my free arm to punch him as hard as I could in his stomach. Yes. Then knee him in the groin and kick him again.
You want to see me smile? Well, I'm smiling!
This stuns him for a few seconds and he loosens his grip on me, allowing me to break free. I quickly run to my car and as I get in, he runs at me and tries pulling me out of the car, holding the knife in the other arm, and even yells, "Why are you making this so fucking difficult?" Because she wants to survive? I grab a half-empty soda bottle I had in the cup holder and throw it, and luckily it hits his head and he lets me go. I slam the door and then all of a sudden he jumps right onto the hood of my car and starts scratching and banging on my windshield with his knife. I put the car in reverse and quickly back out of the spot and reverse down the road with him desperately trying to hold on. He's banging on my hood screaming, "Stop the fucking car!" I turn onto the next road as swiftly as possible and luckily he falls off the hood of my car. I slammed the gas as hard as I could to get as far away from that sick bastard as I could. In my panic state, I drove a couple of blocks down the street and kept making turn after turn onto other side blocks as I feared I was being followed. Eventually, I reached a red light and slammed on the brakes and just sat at the intersection, frozen from what just had happened. I began crying and violently shaking as I was sitting there. It dawned on me that I just came so close to losing my life and I couldn't help but feel like I shouldn't have been alive. Once the light turned green, I pulled over to the side and just sat there crying. Eventually, I get the energy to drive back to the pizzeria and almost immediately after I walk in, my coworker knew something was wrong after seeing me. I practically broke down in front of him and everyone else came to the front wondering what was going on. I fought back my tears and explained everything that had just happened. My coworker comforted me and my boss surprised me and began apologizing profusely for what had happened and for putting me on the night shift. He took me into the office and handed me the phone to call the cops. They arrived at the store and I gave them my statement as well as taking pictures of any marks on me as well as scratches on my car from the encounter as evidence. My coworker followed behind me as I drove home and I collapsed on my bed and strangely enough, I managed to fall asleep. I quit my job the next day. Good move, and luckily a friend of mine managed to hook me up with a new job at her clothing store. As far as the cycle goes, 2 days later I received an update from the police. The entire duplex was owned by the guy's brother who lived on the right side with his wife, and the psycho lived on the left side of the duplex. I learned that he'd been in and out of jail constantly, at first for robberies and assaults, but later on, it was for sex crimes. You survived a serial killer! When they arrived at the house, he was long gone and his family had no idea where he ran off to. But the police insisted they would find him. Well, that's debatable. Apparently, he'd fled to another nearby city and attempted to kidnap a teenager walking alone late at night. Luckily, someone happened to be looking out their window at the right time, called the cops, and the police caught him trying to force her into his car. He manages to flee and the police chase after him. He blew a red light near a busy boulevard and a van slammed right into the driver's side of his car. Yes! By some sort of miracle, the driver of the van only sustained minor injuries, while the psycho succumbed to his wounds long before the ambulance even arrived. I thanked the officers for everything they did and for informing me, and I walked out of the station. I walked down the street and I light up a cigarette as I'm taking in everything I'd just been told. I don't wish death on people, but after hearing about his death, I felt relieved. I felt relieved that he couldn't hurt anyone anymore. I was relieved that I would never have to encounter him ever again, and that I wouldn't have to go through with charging him and reliving what happened that night. My last experience 2 years before this was scary, but I think this one takes the cake as being the scariest, as I was alone and face to face with a psycho. Who knows where I'd be if he managed to pull me into his house. I'm glad her manager, saw the light in the end, but really, putting a 17-year-old pretty female alone on the night shift, that's not very good. But I do understand that several owners of small businesses don't give a fuck about their employees. Whoa, now we're sufficiently a little bit tipsy. Let's get into the next spooky story. You can always tell when Megan True Crime is a little bit drunk because her shoulder just starts to make an appearance. Okay, so we've got a lot of spooky stories to get through, and I kind of like the vibe of this one. It's called Babysitting Gets Creepy. Now, the premise of babysitting has always been a bit strange for me living in Scotland. We don't hire teenagers to watch our beloved children. Now, several people have asked me, if you don't have babysitters for hire, well, who watches your kids? And to that I say, family. We sometimes like our family members and they do it for free. So it's a win-win. I'll say it once, I'll say it again. At the selfish age of 14, 15, I would have happily watched your child fall down a set of stairs if it meant that I could finish an episode of The Hills. This tale comes from Anonymous, so let's dive in. I began babysitting at 13 to earn extra money to spend on horribly embarrassing things like Fall Out Boy CDs.
I know. She really hurt my feelings.
I would almost always work for my dad's clients, he was a lawyer, and get referred by word of mouth. I was babysitting for this one family who had a little girl, 9, and a little boy, 7. The parents seemed okay. A tad crotchety, giving me a full schedule to follow and jokingly threatening to beat any boy who might mysteriously show up after they left. It felt cruel for them to accuse me of even knowing a boy, given I basically looked like an overgrown baby with frizzy hair at that age. Don't worry, darling. My nickname in high school was Ronaldinho, Ronaldo, Bugs Bunny, and Bugsy Malone.
They call me a bunny rabbit and I'm not.
Almost immediately after the parents leave, the little girl sings in a creepy high-pitched voice, "We're all alone now." Righty-o, cue the Shining soundtrack. I know the little boy chimed in, "Let's play rape." Looking back now, I know the kid just probably heard the term on TV, knew the word was shocking and said it for a reaction. I totally bought into it at the time, sputtering, wide-eyed, and changing the subject quickly. These kids were hell for the next hour. I wouldn't let them watch South Park on the TV because their parents did not seem like the type to allow their precious 7 and 9-year-olds to watch a show like that. As soon as I said no, the little girl said casually, "Oh, that's fine. We'll just go play PlayStation in the family room. Feel free to watch it out there." Nope. I knew exactly where that was headed. I said they could watch any other TV show in the living room whilst I made them dinner. The parents had left instructions to make them sandwiches. I could handle that. Sandwich, easy peasy. Before I had even got out the bread, I heard a massive crash. It seemed like the little girl had broken a glass. Tutting and pissed, but ultimately with no way to punish her, I cleaned it up, while these two incredibly weird kids watched on with wide eyes. Dumping the broken glass into the trash, I went back to make the sandwiches. I'm a vegetarian, so while the kids had chicken, I made a simple salad for myself. Just as I was finishing, the little boy screamed out in what, even from my hyper-vigilant state as an accountable teenage babysitter, sounded like a pantomime of pain. Nonetheless, I ran over to the couch in the living room to check on him. "My ankle!" he howled, dramatically flopping back onto the couch. Whilst I tried to figure out how he had hurt his ankle, the little girl slipped out of the room. Peripherally, I was aware of this, but didn't really pay any mind, focused on this little boy pretending to be in pain. He kept saying, "I went to stand, but I hurt too much. I don't know," over and over until his eyes suddenly flickered to just behind me, where I could see the little girl standing with a perturbing smile on her face. He was miraculously healed. Yeah, praise the Lord. At this point, I was thinking these kids were really weird, craved attention a little too much, and probably needed more parental involvement. Whatever, I was 13, and that $60 was only 4 hours away. I set out the sandwiches for the two to eat at the dining table and went to get a soda, and then returned. After pouring soda from them both, I realised they hadn't even taken a bite of their sandwiches yet. I asked them, what were they waiting for? They smiled and said, "For you to take a bite of yours."
Poison!
I'm so glad I had a gut feeling to open the top part of the bread to my sandwich, because when I did, I saw glass. Broken glass. Glass that I'd put in the trash. I stared in horror at the two little kids staring at me with menacing twin grins. I lost it, shouting, "Are you serious? At the very least, you could have really injured my mouth. What's wrong with the two of you?" Instead of crying or apologising or pretending to be ashamed or confused, these two little fuckers began laughing. Not like kids. It was too low. It wasn't that silly, free laugh, kids laugh. It was low and threatening. I'll never forget that noise. My immediate reaction was, these kids are too young to be laughing like that. I called my older sister, who was 17 at the time, cried about what had just happened, and she came and took over for me. We left the house with chills after the parents had arrived. I never babysat for those two again. What I can't get past is the level of premeditation that went into sprinkling that broken glass in my sandwich, and the total remorseless way they responded to me getting upset. They were unlike any two kids I've ever met before. There's nothing more terrifying in this world than a small child laughing at you. Well, unless you think about Boris Johnson in his underwear. That's frightful in itself. Right, we got our serious faces on. Are we ready for another story? I think we should be, because this one is called "Almost Gave a Serial Killer a Car Ride." Now this is a very popular one by username Banluil on Reddit's Let's Not Meet subreddit. So, let's dive in. A little background here. My father was in the army for 21 years, retired, and moved to a very small town in central Florida. He got bored after a couple of years, and even though we didn't need the money between his retirement and what my mum was making as a bookkeeper slash tax prep, he wanted to go back to work. He started working at various gas stations, and it being a small town, the owners wouldn't care if I came there and helped him out with stocking the coolers or even running the register, as long as I didn't sell any beer or smokes. This all took place in the late 80s and early 90s. The actual story I'm going to tell took place in 1990, and I remember the date well because it was shortly after my birthday, and being 15 in Florida, I had just gotten my learner's permit, and my dad would let me drive him to and from work just to get some experience on the road, both day and night. I was sitting in my usual spot at a table that was set up along the windows, book in hand, feet propped up, and a Mountain Dew on the table along with some snacks. I would generally spend most of the evening that way, reading books, getting up to run the register, stock the cooler at different times. I remember glancing up because something caught my attention that was unusual, and I realised that a lady was walking up our parking lot from the direction of the interstate. The gas station was right on the I-25. This in itself was really strange because where we were located, you didn't get many people walking, and definitely not walking from the area of the interstate. I figured she had broken down somewhere and was coming to use the phone to call a tow truck or something. I was completely wrong. She came into the store, looked around for a few minutes, and I remember getting just a strange and creepy feeling about her. She walked up to the counter and started telling my dad a story about how she had gotten stranded and needed a ride up to the next big town up north from us. Ocala was this town. This is important. Remember this fact. Keep it in the lockbox. My dad lets her know that he's working and there's no way he can take her. She turns and looks at me, and while she is looking away from him, my dad catches my eye and subtly shakes his head no. Oh, Daddy knew. Daddy be getting those spooky vibes, those poltergeist vibes. Sorry, I've got something in my eye. I was confused for a second, but then she turns back to my dad and points at me, asking if I can take her. My dad responded back that I only had a learner's permit and wouldn't be able to drive her anywhere and then drive back. Normally, I would have done it, even though it was illegal, because I'd done it a few times before already. I didn't argue with my dad since this was completely out of character for him. He was normally chatty with the customers, but for whatever reason, he was almost curt and dismissive of her. Turns out he had a bad vibe about her from the minute he had seen her walking up the drive. Well, she cusses him out for a minute, charming, and he basically tells her to get out of the store. She slammed the door open and then closed, and I thought the glass was going to break from how hard she had slammed it. And then she stalks out of the store and down the driveway. I keep an eye on her and continue to watch as she makes her way back up the interstate and then starts up on the northbound on-ramp. Almost a year passes, and I'm in my bedroom less than a week before my 16th birthday. I hear my dad yelling from the living room, "Son, get your ass in here and look at this." I quickly run to the living room and see my dad pointing at the TV. And look at the mugshot of the lady on the screen. Hold on to your panties, children. Turns out I almost gave a car ride to Eileen Warnos, who was later convicted of being a serial killer and later put to death. I still have nightmares about what could have happened. Well, for those who don't know who Aileen Wuornos is, I'm not sure if it's Aileen or Eileen. Who cares? She's gone now. But she was a female serial killer. Many argue the first female serial killer in the US. And she would attack men up and down the interstates just who had been unfortunate enough to get in the car with her. Don't get me wrong, okay? Some of these guys were absolute rotten tomatoes of humans. But for the most part, she liked to slice and dice to get off on the thrill of it. And for the money. I mean, it was like $50 or something. Not really worth killing someone over. Oh, fun fact also about the crazy serial killer lady is Ocala was significant because this was one of the places that she actually killed someone at. So if it hadn't been this poor guy who died, it would have probably been this man or his father. If you guys watch my channel, you will probably know I love being a petty bitch. If me and my boyfriend get into an argument, I can definitely cling on to that with dear life for around 3 days. So when someone told me about a story of a girl fighting with her boyfriend which almost led to her being murdered, you know for a fact I had to tell this story. So this story is by username HeartX3Jess and it's called Thought My Boyfriend Got Home From Work. It wasn't my boyfriend. My boyfriend, who I live with, works as a teacher in a town about 15 minutes away by train. He gets home more or less at the same time every day, give or take an hour or so. On the other hand, I work from home. In late January of this year, we gotten into a pretty big fight about something stupid. I can't even remember what it was about now, but it was one of those fights where we didn't speak to each other, text, call, or anything the whole next day. So, this afternoon I was lying in bed getting some work done. It was a Tuesday and I was pretty sure his last class finished at 1 p.m. on Tuesdays, meaning he'd surely be home by around 2:30. But at around 1 p.m. I heard the front door open and shut.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
I thought, I guess he's home early. It was normal for him to skip his last class every once in a while, so I really didn't think anything of it. In fact, I was mostly mentally preparing for the awkward post-fight, "Hey, how's it going?" conversation. So I continued to lie in bed and do my work and wait for him to come in and change his clothes. The bedroom door was closed and I had earplugs sort of half in as I usually do when I'm working. But I could hear the heavy footsteps of him walking around the apartment as he always does. If we hadn't been mid-fight and I wasn't so preoccupied with the awkwardness of it all, I might have noticed it was strange how slow the footsteps were, or how long he'd spent walking around the living room. But I was caught up in the dramatics of the fight and didn't think about it. I was just lying there waiting for him to finally come in. Eventually, the bedroom door slowly opened just a few inches. I turned my head towards the door and prepared to give him sort of an awkward, "we've been fighting for 24 hours" smile. The door didn't open more than a few inches. I looked and saw that it was a woman's hand with red nail polish on the doorknob. I'm not gonna sleep for a week. Whoever was there slowly closed the door just as they had opened it without entering the room. I jumped out of bed, ripped out my earplugs and sort of froze there for a few seconds whilst thinking rapidly. My first thought was, that was not my boyfriend.
Oh, shit.
Then I thought, could that have been his mum? His sister? The landlady? For some reason or another, I concluded that it was surely his mum or sister, so I opened the bedroom door and walked into the living room. There wasn't anyone there, but the room smelled heavily of women's perfume. Then I came to my senses and realised his mum and sister don't have keys and have never come over before. The landlady has never entered without permission. This was a stranger. I ran back into the bedroom and shut the door, now shaking heavily. There is a balcony connected to the bedroom, so despite the cold January rain, I stood on the balcony and called my boyfriend. He picked up and I asked him if his mum or sister might come over unannounced. He told me,
"No, don't move. I'm calling the police."
The police were there in minutes and searched the whole apartment, but of course nobody was there by this point. It was weird though. Nothing was missing from the apartment despite us keeping a jar full of money right in the entranceway. Nothing was even touched. In fact, it seemed like the intruder came straight into the bedroom, saw my legs on the bed, panicked and left. Plus, you can't open that big wooden front door without a key. For a few days, my boyfriend and I were convinced it was just the landlady being nosy. I began to feel better. Nevertheless, we demanded that the landlady change our locks. When she came to change them with her husband, she made a discovery. There was a square area by the keyhole that had been scratched away with something. The landlady said that surely someone had used tools to break into the apartment. Then, a day or two later, my boyfriend told me, "I have to tell you something, but don't freak out." Never tell a woman to not freak out, to not overreact, to stay calm, because whatever you say, the opposite will happen. He told me that the orange kitchen scissors were missing. I obviously freaked out. I tore the apartment apart looking for those scissors. It's been 6 months and those scissors are gone. So the whole thing is just creepy and weird. A stranger breaks into a nice apartment but doesn't touch or take anything valuable. Not even the money jar sitting right in the entrance. I never got to meet the person who opened the door that day. I hope I never do. So what do you think was going on there, guys, apart from me sweating from sheer fear? I mean, I don't know about you. Obviously, you know, the thought of a man being in your house as a female alone is horrific enough, but the thought of those red painted nails just creeping around the door. Another side note from the mind of a psycho-jealous girlfriend is perhaps he was having an affair. What if his mistress thought she would just, play a little game of afternoon delight and then she noticed his girlfriend was still in the house? It reminds me of the story that was in Friends about the Glenda, is that her name? Sorry, I just hit myself in the face there. I'm very drunk. Glenda, the woman who lives in the painting, is that what her name was? And Monica said that she would crawl across the floor at night and open the door. So if this week's episode hasn't taught you already, if you think your life's bad, think about these poor bastards. I hope you all enjoyed this week's episode of Left for Reddit. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up for me. It really helps this wee channel of mine. If you're watching for the first time and you're thinking, oh, she's not too irritating, then please hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes. If you would like to follow me, not home or to Tesco because that's illegal, on Instagram, you can do so at Megan True Crime. I also have a TikTok page at Megan.truecrime. We have Twitter over here in 1956 at Megan True Crime. If any of you have your own spooky stories, please send them across. We've got supernatural, UFO, conspiracy theory, maybe a little almost murder. Then send them to megankillerweekend@gmail.com. Oh, I'm very tired and also a little bit steaming, so I'm gonna head to my bed. But just remember to lock your doors, don't talk to strangers, and also don't give rides to serial killers. See ya! Spooky.